Okay, so hello everyone, welcome to the Real Food Campaign first webinar of the year, from soil to stomach. Just want to tell you a little bit about the campaign. We aim to connect the dots between food, farming and health, and we educate on why real food, what it is and why it matters to human and planetary health. We have a range of events coming up this year, so make sure if you're not already signed up to our newsletter, you sign up and learn a bit more about what's coming up. Our next event is at the beginning of April with Lucinda Miller. She is also known as the Nature Doc, and she specializes in children and family health. We're going to be looking at children's health. So a little bit about me. I am a registered nutritional therapist. I trained at ION, and I have a particularly keen interest in the gut microbiome. I specialize working with women's health, but I also am working with stroke victims, and there's a wonderful amount of research into the gut microbiome, the role of the gut microbiome and strokes. So I'm really interested in today's webinar with Lucy. So our speaker today, Dr. Lucy Williamson, if you don't already know, she has a very interesting take and introduction to nutrition. She was previously a vet, and came to developing and growing an interest in nutrition and studied a master's at King's College London. Her specialism is in the gut microbiome, and she has developed the Gut Project, which is a course that takes you on a journey around all aspects of gut health and the impact it has on overall health. So if you would like to learn more about Lucy's Gut Project, as well as other events that she has coming up, then please do look at her website, lwnutrition.co.uk. Now, all of her details, as well as our campaign details, will be sent out to you in an email with the recording of today's event. So you will have all that information to look at your leisure. Now, today's event, soil to stomach. What do we mean by soil health? What do we mean by gut health? What are the two connected in any way, and why do they both matter? We have a poll to start off with. So I'm just going to, I'd like everybody to take a quick look and pop in their choice. Which is more important, gut or soil health? So I'm just going to wait a little bit and see what the results are. Okay. Oh, it's interesting. Right. Has everyone cast their votes? Okay. Let me now share the results. So can you see that? We've got 1 vote for gut health and 19 votes for soil health. I think that's very interesting. Right. Well, with that in mind, Lucy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. That's a very interesting question, actually. I'm still contemplating it. But I feel like I'm sort of preaching to the converted today, but I mean, that's wonderful. You've obviously, all of you coming at this in different ways and all so interested, and I'm sure there's lots I can learn from you all as well. But, you know, it is really exciting times as far as not only gut health and understanding the very new science behind that, but as well as that, the actual health of our soils, our very reason for being, and how the two are connected. So I'm going to, I'm really excited to be able to share all this with you today, and thank you, Emma, for inviting me. So I'm going to kind of give a big picture approach for the first little bit of my talk, and as where we all fit together, humans and our environment and the soil. And then we'll focus in much more on the actual sort of microbiome and the kind of foods that nurture it and drive our health, and also looking at one I can't remember who it was that's here today that's already mentioned that word inflammation, because that's a big part of this actually, inflammation being quite a driver of chronic disease and very much connected with our gut microbiome and also our land. So I'm going to try and kind of scoop it all up in not too long a time. And then I'm going to demonstrate ferment, which is just a fabulous food, as I'm sure you all know, for helping gut health. So yeah, so just to get started then, that's big picture. So a lot of the work I find myself doing at the moment is trying to get sort out that disconnect that is present at the moment really in our world between our health and our food and where our food comes from, and trying to reconnect people to how your food is produced and how important that is a big part of my work. And it's interesting really when you think about it, because as human beings, it's our most fundamental impact on our land, on the biodiversity of our land, is how we produce that food, how we're looking after the soil. And yet there is this real disconnect. So first of all, I think it's important to just consider microbes for a minute. And really interesting fact to begin with is that as human beings, we've been on this planet for millions of years, but our bacteria have been on it for billions, and we've of course evolved from bacteria. So, you know, right from the start, there's this concept that we've evolved together. It has to be a relationship that benefits both. Bacteria need us and we need them. And soil, of course, on the planet long before humans came along. So healthy soil, what do we mean by healthy soil? Well, it's a very, very important carbon sink to begin with. And in order to do that, it needs to be absolutely bursting with microbes. And in fact, in 1 teaspoon of healthy soil, it's estimated that there are more microbes than there are people on the planet. So there's a phenomenal amount of microbial activity that should be going on in our soil. Sadly, that's the ideal, and the situation isn't quite like that, because in effect, our human influence on the world has been to sterilize it. Whether that's through using agrochemicals, whether it's through processing our food, packaging our food, using antibiotics, getting quite obsessed with hygiene, whatever, any of those different techniques, they are all contributing to sterilizing the world that we live in. And in actual fact, what we're beginning to understand is that our own microbes inside our gut are not only dependent on the food that we eat to nurture them, but they're also very dependent on the environment that we live in. And now that you can start to begin to realize that there are many, many beneficial, or there should be many, many beneficial microbes all around us, particularly in the soil, that we are in fact 2 kind of superorganisms, if you like, that really are, it should work, that we should replenish each other. So the soil being 1 superorganism, a big pool of microbes, and human beings actually, in fact, we, each of us is more bacteria than we are human. We have more bacteria within us and on us than we do our own body cells. So we're a superorganism, soil is a superorganism, and actually we need to coexist so that we can each replenish each other. And that way we get that microbial influence that we need for our health. So that's sort of the big picture. And before I go on to just give a sort of more detailed overview of our own microbiome, which I know many of you will know, but hopefully you might pick up something new as well. It's also interesting just to, with what I've said there, to think that in the last sort of 50 years, our health has declined, our chronic disease has literally gone up like this. And in that time, we've tried to reduce sugar in our diet, we've tried to reduce fat in our diet, nothing we've done has helped. In fact, it's just got worse and worse. And it's interesting to see that while we've taken out the microbes from our world, our chronic disease has gone up. And that's obviously fairly anecdotal, but it is a very vivid image to keep in your mind. And actually at the root of these chronic diseases, whether it's inflammatory bowel conditions, whether it's types of cancer, whether it's heart disease, diabetes, at the root of all these what we call chronic diseases of our time, which is such a health burden that we understand, is inflammation, is the process of inflammation. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about inflammation and how that fits in to the story. So I guess what we're comparing in a way today with this talk is the two different situations we're thinking of is when we talk about real food, that is food that still looks very much like it did when it came out of the ground. We recognize it, we know the ingredients that are in it there. If anything's been added to the food, it's ingredients that we'd have in our kitchen cupboards. We recognize that food and hopefully we know where it's come from. And our farming systems at the moment that are what we would call just generally nature friendly, nature positive, whether they're organic or whether they're regenerative farming systems, but basically working with nature. Those sort of farming systems are really helping to highlight that the farmers, those food producers, are the food makers. They are producing food, whole real food from our soil. And that type of food drives positive health outcomes, there's no doubt about it. Whole nutrient-rich food that hasn't been processed, really driving positive health outcomes. And the opposite of that is then those intensive farming systems. And we mustn't forget that farmers were encouraged to farm like that after the Second World War. And but it's just a situation we found ourselves in, that intensive farming systems using agrochemicals, very much focusing on monocropping, monocultures, moving away from nature in many ways. That farmers within those systems, I think it's fair to say, have almost had to think of their food as just a commodity. It's not actually even a food, it's just a commodity that leaves the farm, they get paid for it and it's used for whatever. And those types of foods really connected much more with a processed diet, an ultra processed diet, where something that we call food is not really recognizable as its components that it's made up of, and that those much more processed foods then are associated with more negative health outcomes. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that as we go. But that's a sort of black and white picture, I think. So let's just think about what we know about our microbiome, and then we'll go back to soil and start thinking how it's all connected together. So I know that a lot of you know about the microbiome and that we each have this unique community. It's as individual as our fingerprint, really, and we get it at birth. And because we're sterile as babies, so when we're born, that's when we get our first community. And as we go through life, according to the lifestyle that we have and the food that we eat, nurtures that original community of microbes. And important just to say that it is a phenomenally exciting, one of the most dynamic areas of biomedical research for sure, and will become the future of medicine. The evidence that's growing rapidly over the last particularly 5 years is just showing this phenomenal impact that our microbiome has on our health. and enough that it's really now being referred to as a new organ that we just didn't know existed before. So those microbes, they're living in our large intestine right at the end of our gut, and basically they do the things that we can't do. They take fiber from the food that we eat, of course, which is why that plant rich diet is so important. They take many bioactives in those plants, in our food, and they convert them for us into thousands of chemicals that we can't make ourselves. So things like the building blocks for hormones, they make amino acids, building blocks of proteins that we can't make ourselves. They produce anti-inflammatory products for us, potentially one of their most vital roles. Just to pick out one of those, by fermenting fiber in our food and the fiber that we can't digest ourselves, our microbes produce a substance called butyrate, which is known to have a really important anti-inflammatory role in our gut. And in fact, there's connections we see with people who suffer from inflammatory conditions, whether it's inflammatory bowel disease or rheumatoid arthritis, where there's general inflammation going on in the body. There is often also an associated less favorable microbiome and lower levels of that anti-inflammatory butyrate. So, so that's the concept of where the connection is. And Emma and I were talking about this the other day, that you can really think of our gut as the interface between our biology and our outside world, because it is actually a completely closed tube to our body. It's open to the air at our mouth at one end and of course open at the other, and it's completely enclosed, and everything that goes through there is sealed off from our body. So it is in fact the interface between our biology and nature, and our biology is the most wonderful thing. And if we can just optimize our own biology, it has this phenomenal ability to repair and to heal. And of course, a lot of that is mediated through our gut bacteria, our microbiome. So that's the sort of general principle. And then the areas that we know that our microbiome is really impacting our health. One of the most interesting, I think, for most of us in this area is how it affects our immune system. So 80% of the cells that make up our immune system sit in the wall of our gut, and they are there right from the beginning when we're born. And what happens is initially our immune system needs to be almost trained to know what to respond to. It needs to be regulated so that it responds to what we need it to, but it doesn't over-respond. And actually, it turns out that our gut bacteria are very vital in that process. So there they are in the gut. Our immune system, which is protecting us from our environment, is right there beside them. And they are pivotal in developing that immune system and optimizing it for us. So it's giving us protection. So straight away, we're getting protection from those microbes. And the interesting thing with our immune system is that our immune system and what we call inflammation are both very intertwined. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now, and then I'm going to come back to the other areas in our health that our gut bacteria impact. But when we think about inflammation, what I want you to think about is if you get a bee sting or if you get a cut on your finger, inflammation is how that heals. Inflammation is the process that protects us from that bee sting. And it's a very short, sharp process. It's a very necessary biological process to protect us. And that's fantastic. But the problem is when that inflammation goes on and on and on, and it's a very prolonged response in our body, then we start to get huge changes in our metabolism, responses by our body that are very negative on our health. And it's that is at the root of so many, it's the trigger for so many of these chronic diseases. So where does our microbiome come into that? So I mentioned that our gut bacteria are producing thousands of chemicals. They are literally able to alter our own DNA in that they will alter how our genes are expressed and how that translates into how our biology works. So it's all very interlinked. And depending on how our microbes are regulating our immune system, very much impacts how we are able, how our biology is able to cope as far as inflammatory change goes. So if our microbiome is as optimized as it can be, it really is helping to protect us against that prolonged inflammation, those inflammatory processes that go on within our body. And of course, there's lots of other factors as well, but our microbiome is really, really important. And just to kind of take that one step further, if we think about real food, so whenever I say real food, I'm thinking about food that has come from healthy soil, then that real food is as nature intended. It's a whole food matrix, and all those nutrients in that food are working together. And we eat them. It's like when you eat an apple, you get the fiber as well as the sugar. So you don't get a spike in your blood glucose because you've also got fiber in the apple, which is helping to keep your sugar nice and steady. Or if you eat, if you eat some yogurt, you are getting lots of natural, wonderful bacteria in there, natural probiotic. And you're also getting the matrix of dairy, which is a very as nature intended type of food. And in fact, we know the saturated fat in dairy is quite beneficial for our health compared to taking it out of dairy and putting it in a processed food, and then it affects our health in a very different way. So if you compare eating a very natural food to eating a processed food, how does that affect our microbiome? What we know from really interesting research now that's coming through from King's College recently is that a lot of those additives in our food, they're quite detrimental to our gut bacteria. So whether it's an emulsifier, which changes the texture within the environment within the gut, or whether it's artificial sweeteners or just additives in general, there is research now coming through really interesting, starting to show that that really disrupts our microbiome. And those types of additives, of course, in processed food, but also processing food, it breaks down the structure of plants, the structure of our food, and it releases sugars and releases fats, so they're free in our digestive system. And that, again, is a very unfavorable environment for our gut bacteria. So just by kind of talking about that, hopefully you can start to see that if we're eating more processed foods, they are what we are calling now part of a more inflammatory diet, because it drives a negative out of balance microbiome, which then really impacts our health. So the other angle it's all about comparing is that whole real food as nature intended, which is working with our biology, and that real food is coming from the soil. So let's just go back to the soil and think about some analogies. And I just think it's fabulous when you think about all those microbes again. The roots of crops and plants growing in soil, they're very, very dependent on those microbes to release nutrients from the soil so that the plants can grow to be nutrient rich and really healthy. And in fact, we have a state in the UK at the moment that really what we're referring to it as a hidden hunger, where we're starting to lose all these really valuable micronutrients in our food, because the way our soils have become so lacking in that microbial diversity is starting now to show as our crops being far less full of goodness, full of those micronutrients. They might look green and bright and colourful and wonderful, but actually they don't have such high, the good levels of those micronutrients. And we know that we are low in a lot of micronutrients like iodine and calcium, and it's not all because of how the plant is grown, but some of it is. So the more we can enrich our soils with microbes, which unlocks the nutrients for our plants to absorb and be nutrient rich, the more benefit it is for our health. And interestingly then, plants also feed back into the soil. They give back sugars into the soil via their roots, and that feeds the microbes in the soil. So it's a wonderful analogy to our own health, the soil health and that of the crops that are growing in it, and our own gut and our own health, and the microbes are the same factor in both. So I've always really liked that analogy. So hopefully starting to see then how the microbial content of the soil and our own health is so important. And in fact, there is a lovely review that I might get Emma to put on the chat. It's called "Does Soil Contribute to the Microbiome" by Blum, B-L-U-M, and many of you might have read it, but I'd really urge you to read it. It was done in 2019, and it's a lovely review of all the ways that the health of the soil contributes to our own microbial health. And one of the references in there talks about research that's been done where if you look at the microbiomes of people who live in very rural communities where they're very much living with the land, maybe agriculture is their main industry, and you compare those to the microbiomes of urbanized people, what we see in the very rural population groups is that their microbiomes are very similar. Whereas in an urbanized population, they are very individualized. And what that tells us is that in an urban population where you haven't got the impact of the microbes around you in the soil, then everybody is very much developing their own microbiome because of how they eat or other choices. Whereas when you're in a rural situation, you've very much got the influence of the same microbes around all of you. So, you know, there's lots of, it's very new science, and a lot of it we have to just infer, and there's a lot of logic. But there are some new studies coming through, and there are even studies being done now where we measure the structure of the soil and the microbes in the soil, and then we measure the nutrient quantity in the food, and we can start to see connections. So I don't want to go on too long because I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for questions and time for me to do my ferment. Just a couple of other things to touch on though. I think it's also, and this is with my vet hat on, I think it's also really important just to think of grazing animals as well, and where do they fit into the whole picture, because in actual fact, without them, it would be very hard for our soil to be really healthy. So if you can just picture a farmer's field where they're farming regeneratively, maybe they're an organic farm, and what that generally means now is that those cows might be grazing a whole variety of different plants. So rather than just being out on grass for half the year, these cows are out on pastures where we have lots of herbs and clovers and many different types of plants for them to graze on, which is obviously completely natural for them. And then what they're doing is they're taking that very natural source of food, a real diverse, lovely variety of plants, and their own microbial chambers, because ruminants have the most well-developed gut health of all, huge fermentation chambers. They're then taking our pastures and they're able to convert it into either meat or milk, which is then, of course, a very nutrient-rich food for us. And the benefit that we see now with organic farming systems is that in beef in particular, there's much higher levels of unsaturated omega-3, which is low in our diet, so that's a great thing. And the omega-3 is also higher in milk actually, but only by a very small amount, so debatable whether it really makes a difference to our health. But just to say that we're starting to be able to see that the nutrient quality of animal protein when it's farmed in a very nature-friendly way is what we would call nutrient rich. And again, some wonderful research coming out of King's College at the beginning of last year, which was showing that even with people, when we're following a diet rich in a variety of plants, which is what we're all advised to do for our gut health, even if we add in some minimally processed animal protein, fish, eggs, dairy and beef, that's not detrimental to the microbiome at all. In fact, in some cases, of course, with fermented dairy, it's very beneficial. So my kind of key takeaway is that the health of the soil is very much impacting the nutrient quality of our food, which then feeds through into our microbiome and nurturing that. And just to go back to how other areas of our health that the microbiome impacts, and then I'll wrap up, is, you know, we're in the middle of an allergy epidemic at the moment, and it's not just because it's being diagnosed more. Well, our microbes produce a chemical which is required to make sure that the cells that line the wall of our gut are able to adhere to each other very, very closely and form very tight junctions so that we're not absorbing substances through our gut wall that we might then have an immune reaction to. And often what we find is if people who've had major surgery or been on antibiotics for a very long time, and of course that's kicking out the good bacteria as well as the bad, all of a sudden you can develop an allergy that you didn't have before. And we're quite concerned now that that rise in allergies is very much associated with less contact with microbes in our world. And other areas that are really exciting that we're starting to see connections with our health and our microbiome is cognitive disorders later on in life, Alzheimer's, dementia, even attention deficit disorder in children, helping to regulate cholesterol, our mood, just a phenomenal amount of research. And that's why it's becoming so central to our health. And the exciting news is in all of this that I think for most people here today, all following a very gut healthy diet from what I can gather, but it is wholly possible to change your microbiome within 48 hours. So a lovely story just to finish with, because I was at King's College, I do follow quite a lot of the research from Tim Spector, because that's where he does all his twin genetic research, and of course our UK gut health expert. And he went to live with our last remaining hunter-gatherer tribe in Tanzania called the Hadza tribe. And he lived with them for 4 days, and they live off the land, and they obviously eat a very fiber-rich diet. And in those 4 days, his microbes actually improved in diversity and variety by something like 46%. It was phenomenal, just because he had reverted away from that Western diet and was living close to the land. So getting that transfer of microbes directly from the soil, as well as the way they were eating, nurturing his own microbes. And then he always says when he was on the plane on the way home, within 12 hours, it had pretty much gone on eating that aeroplane food. But it was just a wonderful picture of how, and actually if you look on world maps, you can see that the areas of the world where biodiversity is still maximum, very much in developing countries, it's the complete opposite to where our Western diet is and to where the highest levels of inflammatory and chronic disease are. So, you know, real connection starting to show. So I could talk about this all day, but I'm not going to. So I think what I'll do is I'll be led by Emma, but do you want to, shall I just start doing my ferment and keep chatting and take questions, or how would you like to do it now, Emma?
I think that sounds really good. I just want to make sure that the screen, I think everyone can see everyone then. Yes, I think I think the screen is going to flip between me talking and Lucy talking, but if you're happy to maybe tell us a little bit about what ferment you're making and what you're starting to do, that would be great. And then we've already got some questions come in. So as I'm asking these questions to Lucy, please, anybody else, if you have anything, pop them in the chat and I will read them out to her. So yes, Lucy, please let us know what ferment you're doing and how you're starting.
Excellent. So I think as well, maybe you've done this anyway, Emma, automatically, but do people have to click on the speaker view maybe so that while I'm cooking and things, it's easier to see the ingredients? Maybe that's happening anyway, just thought I'd mention.
I've got it on that right now.
Amazing. Okay, that's great. So I'm just going to very quickly turn my screen off while I just get my ingredients. It'll literally take me 10 seconds and then I shall reappear, hopefully. Okay, just get myself set up here.
Just a question to our audience. How many people eat fermented foods? And how many of you make your own fermented foods? Making kefir, fermented vegetables like cabbage. And then we've got a hand up. Thank you, Alex. Couch grass is a remedy for urinary conditions. It's always great to have a medical herbalist around. Cabbages, herbs, beetroots, making kefir, kefir cheese, sauerkraut. Kefir is very popular. Sally also makes her own kefir and cabbage. Alex makes kefir every week or 5 days. Kefir again, vegetables, cheese, trying but failing and slightly fearful of it. Dulce, I'm with you on that. Yeah. I've had exploding kombucha, glass bottles exploding in a kitchen before, and yeah, put me off a little bit. Okay, we've got kombucha. Saba makes kombucha. Need to hear about that a bit more from you then. I need a lesson. Sarah eats and makes a ferment veg and dairy a few times a week. I think that's really key. The frequency of fermented foods. Recent research has said that a high in fiber diet is very important for gut health, but that fermented foods are also vital. However, you need to eat the fermented foods very regularly, so 3 to 5 times a week. And the way that it works is, I'm sure Lucy will maybe touch on this as well, is it supports what's being called a transient microbiome. So when you eat these microbe-rich, gut-friendly fermented foods, they don't kind of stay within your gut microbiome. What they do is they pass through, and it's in the passing through that they make changes. They adapt what's already there, and that's the way that it can support your overall gut microbiome and therefore health. Yes, pasteurized is pointless. I like pasteurized is point. Wonderful illustration there. You've tried making sauerkraut. So I think we're in very good hands here, everyone. So I'm going to hand back to Lucy now so she can tell us a little bit about what she's doing.
Yeah, it's also just to pick up on the kefir comments there. I mean, I think kefir is just a fabulous, it's just one step further than yogurt. It's just so bursting with microbes. It's fabulous. And there is also some good research on kefir now that it does actually the microbes get to where they need to, because of course they've got to go through that really harsh environment in your stomach, and then they've got to go all the way through your small intestine before they get to where they actually do their work, which is in the large intestine. And what we are starting to understand now is the sort of food protection of the kefir, the dairy or whatever the matrix of food is around those microbes. When you have it in a very natural food source, actually protects them so they get to where you need them. So that's just one extra thing to understand about kefir. But yeah, we certainly enjoy drinking every day, and I've had equally dubious success with making my own. But moving on to plant ferments then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this is organic cabbages. I've got a nice red cabbage here. I've got a green one that I've started chopping up, and a nice orange organic carrot, just to bring in the fact that these are wonderfully colourful vegetables, obviously full of antioxidants. That's giving them these really bright colours. And one thing I didn't mention when I was talking is that the one key thing that is absolutely fundamental with gut health is to get the maximum variety of plants that we can in our diet. And so I know Alex is here and is much more qualified to talk on this than I am, but plants have a phenomenal amount of bioactives, minute little nutrients in them. And as far as types of fibre go, we're sort of advised to maybe try and get about 30 different types of plants in our diet every week. And it's important to remember that that can be from obviously fruit and veg, like I'm doing here, but also herbs and spices, even nuts and seeds and pulses and beans. But I think the herbs and the spices is always the one that gets missed out, and yet it's a very wonderful way to try and get that plant diversity as well. So the first thing is when you do your ferment, and I'm going to go through this bit very quickly because I actually think a lot of you know how to make your ferment. This is a recipe that was given to me by a chef who I work with called Katie, whose family have Peterlee Manor Farm in Buckinghamshire. And I like to do it the very natural way, where I chop all the veggies and then I add some salt and I just knead it for about 10 or 15 minutes, and that releases all the natural water from the vegetables and really helps to start sort of breaking down very naturally that structure of the plant. So I'm going to just get that process going, and then once I'm at the stage where I'm actually kneading it, as in not kneading like a loaf of bread, but really working the juice out of the veg, then maybe we'll start having some questions. One thing that's obviously really important is you need to sterilise your jar. So I'm doing a litre Kilner jar, and that has been sterilised, and I washed my hands before we began today, because you're really wanting to make sure that you give the natural bacteria in the plants every opportunity to thrive. So I'm going to put all this in my huge bowl, and it's amazing how it all shrinks down when you start extracting the liquid from it. Generally, I find for a litre jar of ferment, it's one big cabbage and maybe a couple of other smaller vegetables is about enough. So I'm going to do half green, half red, and a carrot, and that should be about the right amount to go in. But this is what I love about making vegetable ferments, that you can literally just do whatever you've got. It's a fantastic way, as you know, of preventing waste. Just using whatever you've got in your veg drawer and making it into a ferment. I'm going to add in some rosemary to mine because I happen to have rosemary growing in the garden. And actually today when I walked out, I noticed I've got chives growing already, which is very exciting. So I'm going to put some chives in there as well. To add a bit of pungent, maybe a bit of ginger, or juniper berries is another lovely one with red cabbage. So lots of different ways. Garlic as well, I'll probably put in a little bit of garlic to this. And what I find is it takes about between 1 and 4 weeks for this ferment to really develop its flavour. So it's really just up to you how you like it to taste, whether you want to leave it. You can try it after a week, and if you're not sure, then leave it for a bit longer. And the key thing with this process is that, as you'll see shortly, it's important to make sure that the veg is totally covered by liquid, because what we're trying to do is encourage those natural anaerobic bacteria, the lactic acid producing bacteria. We're trying to encourage them, and they need to be kept away from the air. So that's all my veg in. lots of fantastic antioxidants in there, and actually our gut bacteria are responsible for activating a lot of the antioxidants in our food. So I'm going to just add into that some rosemary, which I've got here, and I'm going to put in these chives, which I think I'm quite lucky that they've just survived the winter and they were still growing happily in the garden, as I say, when I went out this morning. So chives going in. There we go. And some garlic. I'm going to show off and say the garlic was from the garden as well. Actually, I found garlic really easy to grow, so that was really great. So what else is it important to say about the ferment? So the wonderful thing is when you ferment vegetables, you're breaking down the structure of them and also creating this sort of nicely acidic environment, which actually makes the nutrients in them much easier for us to absorb. So it really is a complete win-win. So that's a pretty big bowl full of veg. As I say, it's about a whole cabbage and a carrot and some other herbs and spices. And then to fill a litre jar, I would normally use about 3 or 4 teaspoons of salt, just using sea salt here. And although that seems a lot, actually the sort of guidelines are for each of us that we don't want to have more than 1 teaspoon of salt a day. And in this jar, there's probably about 20 portions of fermented veg. So, you know, to add 3 or 4 teaspoons to the whole, not a problem at all. So I am going to start, I'm just going to put that out of my way there. And I'm just going to start working the salt into the veg to try and bring out the water, which it will happen. It'll take about 10 minutes. So while I'm doing this, I think this is a good time maybe to take some questions, Emma.
Okay, so please pop your questions into the chat. We do already have some questions from people that can't attend live today. And one of them is, what about phytonutrients in animal products? Are there any, and can you get adequate amounts by consuming healthy animal products to support our gut microbes, gut microbiome health?
Yeah, that was a really interesting question that came through. And so it is an area that's we're sort of starting to understand a bit more. So first of all, just to say, phytonutrients are basically the really beneficial nutrients in plants beyond vitamins and minerals. So when we start really getting down to the nitty-gritty, it's what I call bioactives or antioxidants. And they, the reason that, so that the key thing to remember always with our microbiome, just so we make sure we understand this concept, is that they need, first and foremost, they need fiber in our diet. And so that has to come from plants. That is why, you know, there's a lot of talk about a plant-based diet. It's to make sure we're getting all that fiber, because the fiber is the carbohydrate that we can't digest ourselves, and our microbes ferment it for us, get their energy from doing that, and in turn make all these other thousands of chemicals for us. So of course, when we eat a variety of plants to get the variety of fiber, we're also getting a variety of these very beneficial phytonutrients, and many ways, of course, that they are beneficial to us. So interestingly then, there is now this concept of, well, those cows that I was talking about before, if they are eating pastures which are rich in different types of grasses and herbs, then they're actually converting those phytonutrients into meat or into milk. And I am aware that there is some knowledge growing in that area that actually pasture-fed beef particularly, that we have been able to see that they have phytonutrients within the beef. Now, I don't know, I honestly don't know what level it's at, and I can't believe it's at a level that would be anything as beneficial as just getting them from plants. And of course, we, you know, when we talk about plant-based, you want to have about, if you're a flexitarian diet and you're eating plants, but you're also happy to eat meat and dairy and fish and eggs, as I am, then the rule of thumb is 2/3 plants and 1/3 everything else. So less but better from animal sources. So I'm pretty comfortable I get my phytonutrients from plants, but it is an interesting question, and I hope that goes some way to answering it.
I also think it's important to bear in mind how we digest our proteins as well. And we have to ensure that we're properly digesting. And, you know, we've got to think about, I like to talk about the free flowing river of digestion. And digestion actually starts in our head, in our brain, to really trigger the production of things, the movement, the pulsating of throughout the digestive system to move our food down and to break it up, but also our stomach acid. And unfortunately, things like stress and getting older reduces our ability to make adequate amounts of stomach acid, and that's vital for breaking down proteins. So I like to look at it, and I think you've put it so beautifully, looking at I wrote it down because I thought it was so good. 2 super organisms that coexist to replenish each other. I think that's fantastic. And definitely the Real Food Campaign, we're really key to encourage holism, you know, holistic health, not to look at one aspect of health in isolation. Okay, so moving on to our next question. I've read that by increasing carbon in soils, it increases the carbohydrate content of plants, and the proteins of plants are reduced. Could you please expand on this?
So, yeah, you may be better to expand on that one, Emma, are you? Or
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's an area that's still being explored. What I've understood, though, is that we've had such a loss of carbon from our soils through intensive farming. We've lost a lot of the soil carbon into the air. Now, I'm not well read on it at all, but I somewhat understand that maybe by capturing some of that air carbon and putting it back into our soil, that maybe we're not changing things dramatically. Maybe we're trying to find a nice balance again, or a better balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's looking at the big picture again, isn't it? That when we think about soil and it being, you know, such a carbon sink, it's one of its most vital roles, particularly, of course, thinking about climate change. And I think I probably didn't finish the sort of picture I had where we were talking about the cow in the field and it's grazing all these different herbs, and its fermenting chamber is converting it either into meat or milk. But also don't forget that at the same time, one of the reasons why the grazing animals are so important is that they do many other things as well. So even just the fact that they have open hooves and they're moving constantly around into different areas to graze different areas, the hooves actually cut into the soil and they aerate it, just like we do our gardens with a fork. So they're aerating the soil. Of course, they're fertilizing it, they're adding the microbes back to the soil, but they're also trampling the dead carbon, the dead matter into the soil, and the worms are then taking that down for the microbes to extract energy from. So, you know, there's many, that question about the carbon and the nutrient balance then of the plants. I don't know specifically about protein and carbohydrate, but definitely organic milk, for example, much higher in protein. And really, I think it just comes back to as nature intended. You know, if we're getting that soil structure back, and it's a much more effective carbon sink than it is if it doesn't have that microbial content and the right structure, then the nutrient quality of the crops is going to suffer.
We've just had Terry comment, Terry Clayton. She says that carbohydrate content of the plants is governed by the level of health of the plant, something that John Kempf refers to as the plant health pyramid. The first stage is complex carbohydrate synthesis, next is protein, then fats, etc. This is not necessarily related to the level of carbon. Thank you very much for that, Terry. Terry does some fantastic work. She is a wonderful contributor to our Mighty Network community. So again, if you're not part of that, then please do join, because I love reading Terry's articles. She is well sourced, well referenced, and she's a great source of information. Thank you. Okay, next question.
Just to show you quickly, it's starting to get really moist, the veg, and it's very therapeutic actually, standing here doing this. So in a minute I'm going to push it into the jar and you can see all the liquid coming out of it.
I think that's great. I love the therapy around it. I think it also helps to, maybe put us into a less of a stress state, which is always great for our gut microbiome. Sure. Okay, so we've got, what about glyphosate? Could you please give an explanation as to how or why glyphosate impacts the health of soil and possibly our health?
So again, I know Emma will kind of add in a bit here. It's an area that I really want to learn more about, but I am, as we all are, just so concerned about the level of glyphosates. And I guess the reason why they were thought to be safe to begin with was because the process within biology that they interrupt is not a process that we as humans have going on in our body. But of course, it turns out that our microbes very much do. And so the thinking now is, as far as I understand it, that glyphosates are very much impact in our food, coming through in our food system, very much impacting our own microbes and therefore in the soil as well. But it's just, it's another, I don't know if anyone follows Dr. Zach Bush, who is an amazing medic stroke oncology researcher stroke pioneer now of trying to learn from nature and to understand how to mirror nature in approaching health. He has done a fantastic video that we could share with you, which a real concern of his is glyphosates, and literally just saying that as somebody who was directly involved in cancer research and literally from the sort of 1980s onwards starting to see this huge increase in all types of cancer, not just one or two, and that's at the same time other chronic diseases as well, and of course also at the same time glyphosates very much being used increasingly in agriculture. So my knowledge around glyphosates is very broad, but we do need to get rid of them. And Emma, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add.
I started talking and I'd muted myself. That wasn't helpful. No, I think Dr. Zach Bush has some great work. I urge everyone to take a look. There's also, I'm going to use the word fantastic, but also terrifying, book by Stephanie Seneff. It's called Toxic Legacy. She researches a lot around glyphosate. So just for those who don't know, glyphosate is a compound they put into some Roundup, I think it's called, isn't it? There's not fertilizer. Yes, and as Lucy was saying, it was believed that it works on plants, and we don't have the mechanisms like plants do, so it doesn't work on us. However, they have found that actually it doesn't work on us, it works with our microbes, and as it kills a certain pathway within microbes in the soil, it can potentially kill that same pathway within our gut microbes. So this book by Stephanie Seneff is is incredible and can be quite scary. But I urge people to take a look at her work. Again, the campaign, as a campaign, we're actually hoping to speak and interview her. So again, sign up to our newsletter to learn a little bit more. We have another question from Jeff. I understand that different microbes in the soil play different roles. Do different types of microbes in our gut microbiome play different roles? What are they, and how do we maintain the diversity so that all those functions operate efficiently?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The answer is that yes, there very much are different microbes, and we, the basic way to think about it is good microbes and bad microbes. But for example, in our own within our own gut, one of the key microbes that we want to encourage is bifidobacteria, and you'll often see this on a yogurt as well as one of the cultures. And particularly the balance between that one and another one, which is called I can never get the name right, Firmicutes, I think. And if the balance is tipped, then it's less favourable. But at the moment, of course, it's we're only at the very beginning of being able to understand or even test to see what our own mixture of microbes is. But the key role, like the key thing to remember really is that as long as we are eating in a way that nurtures the good microbes, and basically that is to eat all those fibers that we've talked about, to avoid the processed food, to get back to that real whole foods from these nature positive farming systems, the real nutrient rich foods with all those bioactives in them, all those phytonutrients. And of course the fermented food, and the difference there is like ferment like this, it's giving us the nutrients for our microbes, but it's also then over time building up really beneficial bacteria which boosts our own bacteria, basically a probiotic. So so as long as we are eating in that way and nurturing our microbes in that way, then it will give us a good balance. And it's the same in the soil. If we look after the soil properly, then you will get that, you will achieve that good balance. You might want to check out, there is a company now called Zoe, Z-O-E, which is Greek for life, and they, not yet in the UK, but they are partly British, but in America you can actually sign up, and they will, through a very well researched evidence-based system, they can send you a test kit which allows you to map your own microbiome, and they'll give you a recommendation as to how you should eat for your particular microbiome, because as I said, each of us has an individual one, and what works for one person, there is a general rule, which is what we're talking about today, but one step further than that, how one person metabolizes their food differs to another, and therefore getting a test done like that actually will tell you what you have and how you might be able to alter it. And if you sign up to Zoe, they will tell you when that test is available in the UK. And it's a fantastic organisation, all based around research, and really their reason for being is that they're wanting to get more people involved. They're wanting to accumulate more information around the microbiome in order to develop science. So that's maybe one to have a look at. Just while I'm speaking, because I know we've gone over on time, I just wanted to show you, and hopefully you can see there the liquid. If I tip it, you can sort of see the liquid that's really developed there, and it's literally dripping off my hands. And that is all just the natural liquid that's come out of the veg by kneading it. So I'm nearly there. I'm just gonna, I've got
a couple more questions. The compound that Lucy was talking about, the anti-inflammatory one, is butyrate, B-U-T-Y-R-A-T-E. And one other question that's come in, the organization she was just talking about is Zoe. Is that Z-O-E, Lucy? Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions. I'm mindful of the time. We've gone over, but are you happy if I just pass these over to you. Fermentation aside, and I think it follows nicely from what you were just talking about, this individuality, do our microbes prefer being supplied with cooked or raw veg fiber? Is there a difference?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's a tricky one, because I would always have said that raw is wonderful, very much how nature intended it, but actually, depending on the type of cooking that you do, it can make the nutrients within the plants a little bit easier to absorb, but it also changes the fiber. So I would dip out and say it's all in a balance, and a mixture of the two is good. I mean, even with this ferment here, it's really changed the structure of the vegetables, but not, not only in a beneficial way. There's been no heat treatment, for example. So, I'm sure you're aware that as soon as you try boiling some potatoes or some carrots, for example, the vitamin C really leaches out into the water, and you lose that wonderful nutrient. So you could argue that therefore it's better to have the carrot raw, but then cooking it does break down some of the structure, a bit like with oats. They're a really good example. If you have dry oats in muesli, it's really, really hard for our body to get some of the nutrients from there that are really locked away. Whereas if you soak oats overnight, you break down those phytates that block our ability to absorb nutrients from oats, like iron and calcium and zinc, which is really key with our immunity as well. And so it very much varies depending. And another interesting one is with potatoes. If you cook them and let them go cold, it changes the fiber of the potatoes. You might remember the name, Emma, I can't remember the name, but it literally changes the fiber so that it's in a more beneficial form for our gut microbes, but it's not like that with every veg. So I think the golden rule is to vary it. But if we are cooking veg, to steam them or to stir fry very quickly, to try and do it in a way that's maintaining the nutrients. Yeah.
Resistant starch.
Resistant starch, that's it.
Happens with potatoes, rice, and pasta. So I like to kind of point out as well that if you're trying to look at 30 different plant foods, and Lucy described what that really is, including, so it includes herbs, spices, plants, vegetables, fruits, beans, lentils, all of these things. Actually, by changing the way you're eating it, so a ferment, so this red cabbage is one, and then if you were to have red cabbage raw or cooked, it would be classed as two portions, two different things. Okay, a quick question: is reaction to histamine in food an inflammatory reaction, and how to deal with it outside cutting the food we react to? Do you want to take that?
No, I think I'm going to decline. No,
I would like to just...
Yeah, I don't like to try and answer things that I don't know the answer to. And there may well be somebody else here that knows the answer, and I'd be really interested to know.
I think that histamine, I always see it as the food isn't wrong. There's nothing wrong with the food apart from ultra processed foods. But it's our body's ability to break it down that may need some support. So we're not in a position here to be really giving out any individual advice. I think I would advise speaking with a registered nutritional therapist about that. I know a little bit about it, but that actually, if you can support the microbiome to be able to handle your histamine, then you're okay. There's a lot of talk about a histamine bucket, and as long as you support the little tap at the bottom of the bucket, you won't have a histamine problem. The histamine doesn't overflow at the top of the bucket. It can flow nicely out through the tap at the bottom. Yes, that's my brief 2 cents on it. And lastly, my white cabbage ferment got slightly pinkish and slimy, looking like on top of it after 3 months. Is this due to too much air contact?
Well, that's just the perfect question, because what I'm about to do is make sure we don't have any air contact, and then I'll tell you about that. But yes is the answer. So basically, we know we want to really encourage those lactobacilli, and so basically it's very difficult for you to see. I need to invest in a camera that shows you from the top, but these are now submerged. If I press them down a little bit more, they're completely submerged underwater. And a top trick, because I've got this gap at the top of my jar, so I should have chopped a bit more cabbage. If you end up with a gap, it's very important that you close off that gap to the air. And what I then do is just take some of the leaves of whatever it is I've been chopping and just press them in to the top. And then that helps to keep, once the jar is closed, it helps to keep the ferment under the liquid. And in fact, another thing you can do is just cut the stalk off the top of the cabbage and literally kind of push it in the top. So you end up like that. And then when you actually close the jar, it's really sealing it. So now the actual ferment is only up to here, and they're nicely sealed under the water, because yeah, anything that grows above the water, best to just scrape that off, I would say. Definitely try and keep it out of the air.
I've just got a quick question, because I get to this point and then not sure which way to go. The layers of cabbage, the cabbage leaves you just popped on, they're not under the liquid.
Exactly. So
okay.
everything to there is under the liquid, and I've just popped these on the top to make sure with the lid closed that that's this part here where the leaves are is pressing down the actual bit of the vegetable that I chopped up to get to become the ferment, and that's all underwater. So when in a week's time, or maybe about 2 weeks time, I'll open this and I'll take off the leaves and the stalk and just taste it and see if I like it. And if I do, then I'll pop it in the fridge and we'll start eating it, or I'll put it all back together again and leave it for another couple of weeks. And that just stays out now. That just stays out in the kitchen. And, you know, it's nature's wonderful way of preserving veg. It's just amazing, isn't it? So cheap and easy and healthy and win-win.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. We have run over time, but we just, you know, as Lucy said at the beginning, you could talk about this for hours and hours. I've just popped the poll up again. It's the same question, but with another option. And if those of you still with us, if you could maybe pop your answer, then we would love to see that. Or we're getting lots of answers coming in. I also want to say thank you so much, Lucy, for today. It has been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. If you are on social media, then Lucy is fantastic on Instagram. Her posts are so incredibly informative. And she also has an event about bread coming up in April. I attended it last year, and I'm still living the lessons that I learned. So I really, really recommend you to sign up through her website, connect with her on social media to learn more about her work. Now, I'm going to publish this, the results, share these results with you, and there you have it. We have one saying out of 18 responses, yes, we've got one saying soil health, and however, majority of people saying that both are important. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to hear and to connect with you and to hear from you in the future.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm never happier than when I'm just sharing the information that I learn, and meeting other people doing the same. So really enjoyed it today. Thank you.
Thank you.